Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls her age. While her friends spent afternoons at the mall or watching movies, she could be found in her father's workshop, carefully cleaning rifle barrels and adjusting scopes with the precision of a surgeon. Her hands, though small and delicate, moved with confidence around firearms that most people would never dare to touch. The workshop sat behind their modest home in rural Montana, surrounded by rolling hills and endless sky. Her father, Miguel, had been a military armorer before retiring to start his own gun repair business. He taught Sarah everything he knew about firearms, not just how to clean and maintain them, but how to understand their mechanics, their capabilities, and their limitations. Sarah's reputation grew quietly in their small community. Hunters would bring their rifles to Miguel, but, increasingly, they specifically requested that Sarah handle their weapons. She had an almost supernatural ability to diagnose problems that other gunsmiths missed. A slight wobble in the barrel, a microscopic flaw in the firing pin, or a scope that was just a fraction off, Sarah could spot these issues instantly. By the time she turned 22, Sarah had developed her own techniques for rifle maintenance that went beyond anything taught in technical manuals. She would spend hours studying ballistics charts, understanding how weather conditions affected bullet trajectory, and learning about different ammunition types. Her knowledge was theoretical, though. She had never fired a rifle at anything beyond paper targets at the local range. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Sarah arrived at the workshop before dawn, as was her habit. She preferred the quiet hours when she could focus completely on her work without interruption. 3 rifles waited on her workbench: a hunting rifle that needed a new trigger assembly, a vintage military rifle requiring restoration, and a specialized sniper rifle that had been brought in the previous evening. The sniper rifle was unlike anything she had worked on before. It was a custom-built weapon, clearly military-grade, with modifications that spoke of serious professional use. The scope alone was worth more than most people's cars. As Sarah examined the rifle, she noticed were patterns that told a story of extensive field use. This weapon had been carried across difficult terrain, exposed to harsh weather, and fired countless times under challenging conditions. She was deep in her examination when she heard footsteps outside the workshop. Looking up, she saw a man approaching through the morning mist. He was tall and lean, moving with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to operating in dangerous environments. His clothes were civilian, but everything about his posture and alertness screamed military training. "You must be Sarah," he said as he entered the workshop. His voice was quiet, but carried an authority that made her pay attention immediately. "I'm Captain James Mitchell. That's my rifle you're working on." Sarah nodded, continuing her examination. "It's a beautiful weapon. Custom barrel, match-grade trigger, military-spec scope. You've taken good care of it, but it needs some adjustment. The barrel harmonics are slightly off, probably from temperature changes during your last deployment." Captain Mitchell raised an eyebrow. Most gunsmiths would have simply cleaned the rifle and called it good. This young woman was discussing barrel harmonics and temperature effects like an experienced ballistics expert. "How long have you been doing this work?" he asked, genuinely curious. "About 8 years seriously, but I've been around firearms my whole life," Sarah replied, carefully removing the bolt assembly. "My father taught me that understanding a weapon means understanding every aspect of how it functions, not just the basics." As she worked, Captain Mitchell watched her movements. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who had performed these tasks thousands of times. More importantly, she seemed to understand the weapon on a level that went beyond simple mechanical knowledge. "I've been watching you work for 10 minutes, he said finally. "You handle that rifle like you understand what it's really for." Sarah paused in her work and looked up at him. "Every weapon has a purpose. This one is designed for precision at extreme range. Everything about its construction is focused on that single goal. When I maintain it, I have to understand that purpose, or I can't do the job properly." Captain Mitchell nodded slowly. He had worked with many weapons specialists over his 15-year career, but few understood the relationship between craftsmanship and combat effectiveness as clearly as this young woman seemed to. An idea was beginning to form in his mind, one that would challenge everything Sarah thought she knew about her own abilities. Captain Mitchell spent the next hour watching Sarah work on his rifle. Her attention to detail was remarkable. She didn't just clean the weapon. She studied every component, making tiny adjustments that most people would never notice. When she reassembled the rifle, each part fit together with mechanical perfection. "Test fire?" she asked, holding up the completed weapon. "Actually, I have a different kind of test in mind," Captain Mitchell said, his expression becoming serious. "Tell me, Sarah, have you ever fired a rifle at distance?" Sarah wiped her hands on a cloth, considering the question. "I've shot at the local range. 300 yards maximum." "What?" Captain Mitchell walked to the window and pointed toward the distant mountains. "See that ridgeline? About 4 kilometers out. There's a rock formation that looks like a pyramid. I've been observing it through binoculars for the past 3 days, and I think there might be something you could help me with." Sarah joined him at the window, squinting toward the distant ridge. Even with perfect vision, the formation was barely visible as a tiny speck against the mountainside. "4 kilometers? That's over 2 miles. What kind of help are you talking about?" "I'm part of a special operations unit," Captain Mitchell explained. "We've been tracking a group of armed smugglers who have been using that area to move illegal weapons across the border. They've set up an observation post on that ridge, and we need to neutralize it before we can move in." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. This conversation had taken an unexpected turn from simple rifle maintenance to something that sounded distinctly military and dangerous. "My team has been trying to get within range for 3 days," Captain Mitchell continued. "But they have spotters, and they see us coming from miles away. The only approach that might work is an extremely long-range shot from this valley." "How long range?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. 3,800 meters. About 2.5 miles. Sarah stared at him. "That's an impossible shot. Wind conditions, bullet drop, temperature variations, there are too many variables. Even expert military snipers rarely attempt shots beyond 1,500 meters in combat situations." Captain Mitchell nodded. "You're absolutely right. It is nearly impossible. But I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've learned to recognize natural talent when I see it. The way you handled my rifle, your understanding of ballistics, your attention to detail, these aren't just technical skills. They're instincts." Sarah shook her head. "Captain, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm a gunsmith, not a sniper. I've never shot at a living target, and I've certainly never attempted anything like what you're describing." "Let me ask you something," Captain Mitchell said. "When you were working on my rifle, did you calculate the modifications needed for the temperature and humidity conditions today?" Sarah nodded without thinking. "Of course. The barrel temperature will affect accuracy, and the humidity is about 60%, which will impact bullet trajectory over long distances." "And the wind speed?" 8 to 10 miles per hour from the southwest, with gusts up to 15. Not ideal conditions for long-range shooting." Captain Mitchell smiled. "Sarah, you just performed calculations that most trained snipers would need instruments and several minutes to figure out. You did it automatically, as part of your normal thought process." Sarah realized he was right. She had been unconsciously processing environmental factors that would affect rifle performance, something she did whenever she worked on weapons. But making those calculations and actually applying them in a real shooting situation were completely different things. "Even if I had the skills," Sarah said, "I don't have the training. Military snipers train for years to develop the mental discipline needed for long-range shooting under pressure." "That's true," Captain Mitchell agreed. "But they also develop habits and assumptions based on standard military training. Sometimes, natural ability combined with perfect technical knowledge can achieve things that conventional training cannot." He paused, studying her face carefully. "There's something else. My intelligence sources indicate that the smugglers are planning to move a large shipment of weapons tomorrow night. If we don't stop them now, those weapons will disappear into the underground market, possibly ending up in the hands of terrorists or criminals." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had always thought of her work with firearms as purely technical, almost artistic. The idea that her skills might be needed for something with real-world consequences was both frightening and compelling. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" she said finally. "I'm asking you to take one shot. 3,800 meters. If you miss, we'll find another way. If you hit..." He looked toward the distant mountain. "If you hit, we save lives." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had told her. Finally, she spoke. If I agree to try this, I want to understand exactly what I'm shooting at. Captain Mitchell pulled out a tablet and showed her surveillance photos. It's an observation post, currently occupied by two armed smugglers. They have high-powered rifles and radio equipment. Our intelligence indicates they're dangerous individuals with extensive criminal backgrounds. Sarah studied the photos. The distance was extreme, the target was small, and the consequences of both success and failure were enormous. Everything in her rational mind told her to decline. But something deeper, some instinct she had never recognized before, was telling her that this was what all her years of training had been preparing her for. Sarah spent the rest of that day in a state of internal conflict. Captain Mitchell had left her his contact information and told her to take time to think about his request. He would return the next morning for her answer. As evening approached, Sarah found herself unable to concentrate on anything else. She called her father, who was visiting relatives in California. After explaining the situation, Miguel was quiet for several minutes before speaking. "Mija, I taught you to respect firearms and understand their purpose," he said finally. "If this military man is telling you the truth, and if innocent people might be helped, then perhaps this is bigger than just maintaining rifles. But the choice has to be yours. No one can make this decision for you." That night, Sarah barely slept. She kept running calculations in her mind: wind speed, bullet drop, air pressure, temperature variations. She had performed these calculations thousands of times for theoretical situations, but now they might determine success or failure in a real mission. When Captain Mitchell returned the next morning, Sarah was waiting for him with her answer. "I'll try," she said, "but I have conditions. I want to understand everything about this mission. I want to know exactly what happens after I take the shot. And I want your promise that if I feel I can't make it safely, we stop immediately." Captain Mitchell nodded. "Fair enough. Let me brief you on the complete situation." He spread maps and photographs across Sarah's workbench. The smuggling ring has been operating for over a year. They move high-end military weapons to criminal organizations across 3 states. Yesterday, our intelligence intercepted communications indicating a major shipment tonight. Weapons that could end up being used in terrorist attacks or sold to gangs in major cities. Sarah studied the surveillance photos more carefully. The observation post was positioned on a narrow ledge about halfway up the rocky formation. From that position, the smugglers could see anyone approaching for miles in any direction. "My team is positioned here, here, and here." Captain Mitchell indicated points on the map. "Once you neutralize the observation post, we can move in and capture the main group before they complete the weapons transfer. And if I miss? If you miss, or if you decide not to take the shot, we'll attempt a frontal assault tomorrow night. But they'll see us coming, and the chances of casualties on both sides increase dramatically." Sarah realized that Captain Mitchell was offering her the chance to potentially save lives on both sides of the conflict. Her shot, if successful, would allow his team to approach undetected and capture the criminals without a firefight. "What about the actual shooting position?" Sarah asked. 3,800 meters requires perfect stability and clear sight lines. Captain Mitchell smiled for the first time since she had met him. "I've already scouted the perfect location. About a mile from here, there's a natural rocky platform that provides both stability and concealment. The sight lines are clear, and the position offers multiple escape routes if needed." They spent the next 2 hours planning every detail. Sarah insisted on visiting the shooting position to assess conditions personally. When they arrived at the location, she was impressed. Captain Mitchell had chosen well. The rocky platform was naturally stable, with enough room to set up a proper shooting rest. More importantly, the position offered a clear view across the valley to the target ridge. Sarah spent nearly an hour studying the distant target through powerful binoculars. At this range, the observation post looked impossibly small. Morning air is most stable, and the light conditions will be optimal for target identification. Captain Mitchell agreed. They would return to the position at 5 a.m. the following morning. Back at the workshop, Sarah began the most important rifle preparation of her career. She selected Captain Mitchell's rifle because she knew its characteristics perfectly. Every adjustment she made was calculated for the specific conditions they would face: temperature, humidity, air pressure, and the extreme distance. She loaded custom ammunition, selecting bullets specifically designed for long-range accuracy. Each cartridge was inspected individually and weighed to ensure consistency. The powder charge was measured to the exact grain, and the bullets were seeded to precise specifications. That evening, Sarah practiced dry firing exercises, focusing on breathing control and trigger technique. She had read about sniper training methods and understood that mental preparation was as important as technical knowledge. As night fell, Sarah reviewed weather forecasts obsessively. Wind conditions at dawn would be critical. Too much wind would make the shot impossible. Too little might create unpredictable air currents that could still throw off her aim. Captain Mitchell called at 10 p.m. to confirm plans. "Weather looks good for tomorrow," he reported. "Light winds, clear skies, stable conditions." "I'll be ready," Sarah said, though she wondered if anyone could truly be ready for what they were attempting. She set 3 alarms for 4 a.m., though she knew she wouldn't need them. Sleep seemed impossible. Instead, she spent the night visualizing the shot, running through every possible scenario. She had calculated that the bullet would take nearly 5 seconds to reach the target. In that time, wind conditions could change, her target could move, or any number of variables could affect the outcome. At 3:30 a.m., Sarah rose and made coffee. Her hands were steady, her mind clear. Whatever happened in the next few hours, she knew she had prepared as thoroughly as humanly possible. The rest would depend on skill, instinct, and luck. Dawn came slowly to the Montana Valley. Sarah and Captain Mitchell had been in position since 4:45 a.m., setting up equipment and confirming target identification. Through powerful spotting scopes, they could see activity at the distant observation post. 2 figures moved around the small structure, occasionally using binoculars to scan the surrounding area. Sarah lay prone behind the rifle, her body positioned exactly as she had practiced. The weapon rested on a custom shooting rest that Captain Mitchell had brought, providing rock-steady support. Her breathing was controlled and rhythmic, just as she had read in sniper training manuals. "Range confirmed at 3,800 meters, Captain Mitchell whispered, reading from a laser rangefinder. "Wind is 4 miles per hour from the southwest. Temperature is 38 degrees and rising slowly." Sarah made final adjustments to the rifle scope, compensating for the extreme distance. At this range, the bullet would drop nearly 400 feet during its flight. She had calculated the trajectory dozens of times, but now she was about to put theory into practice. "Target is visible," she reported quietly. "I can see one individual clearly positioned near the radio equipment." Captain Mitchell was monitoring multiple radio frequencies, staying in contact with his team members positioned around the smuggling operation. "Team Alpha reports suspects are preparing for the weapons transfer. We need to move within the next 30 minutes. Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly, then consciously worked to slow it down. Every aspect of sniper training emphasized the importance of remaining calm under pressure. Her breathing became deeper and more controlled. Through the scope, she could see her target with startling clarity despite the incredible distance. The man was middle-aged, wearing military-style clothing, and carrying what appeared to be an assault rifle. He was completely unaware that someone was watching him from over 2 miles away. "Wind check," Sarah requested. Captain Mitchell studied wind indicators at multiple points between their position and the target. "Wind is steady at 3 to 4 miles per hour, direction consistent." Sarah began her final calculations. The bullet would take approximately 4.7 seconds to reach the target. During that time, the Earth's rotation would affect the trajectory slightly, a factor called Coriolis effect that becomes significant at extreme ranges. She had accounted for this in her scope adjustments. "I'm ready," she said quietly. Captain Mitchell lifted his radio. "All teams, stand by. Shooter is preparing to engage." Sarah controlled her breathing, settling into the natural respiratory pause between inhale and exhale. This was the moment when her body was most stable, when involuntary movements were minimized. Her finger found the trigger, applying just enough pressure to take up the slack. The target moved slightly, adjusting something on the radio equipment. Sarah waited. Patience was crucial. The shot had to be perfect, not just close. "Target is stationary," Captain Mitchell reported. Sarah applied steady pressure to the trigger, increasing it gradually, until the firing pin released. The rifle discharged with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. Through the scope, she watched the bullet's vapor trail streak across the morning sky. For 0.7 seconds later, she saw the target collapse. "Hit confirmed," Captain Mitchell said, his voice containing a note of amazement. "Target is down. All teams, you are cleared to advance." Sarah remained motionless behind the rifle for several more seconds, processing what had just happened. She had successfully engaged a target at a distance that challenged the limits of small arms accuracy. The shot had required not just technical skill, but an understanding of physics, weather, and ballistics that few people possessed. Captain Mitchell was coordinating the advance of his teams via radio, but he kept glancing at Sarah with obvious respect. "That was an extraordinary shot," he said during a brief pause in radio communications. "I've worked with military snipers who couldn't have made that shot under these conditions." 20 minutes later, radio reports confirmed that the entire smuggling operation had been successfully captured. Without early warning from their observation post, the criminals had been taken completely by surprise. No shots were fired during the arrests, and a large cache of illegal weapons was recovered. Sarah finally moved from her shooting position, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, replaced by a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. "How do you feel?" Captain Mitchell asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. "Different," she said finally. "I always understood firearms theoretically, but I never really comprehended their full potential until now." As they packed equipment, Captain Mitchell received a final radio update. "All suspects are in custody, and the weapons cache has been secured. Preliminary count indicates over 200 illegal firearms, including several military-grade weapons that were reported stolen from an army depot last year." Sarah realized that her single shot had potentially prevented those weapons from reaching criminal organizations where they might have been used to commit violent crimes. The knowledge was both sobering and satisfying. The drive back to Sarah's workshop was quiet. Both she and Captain Mitchell seemed lost in their own thoughts about what had transpired. As they pulled into the driveway, Captain Mitchell turned to her. "Sarah, you have a natural talent that very few people possess. What you accomplished today typically requires years of specialized military training. Have you ever considered putting these skills to use in a more formal capacity?" Sarah looked at him with curiosity. "What do you mean?" Captain Mitchell's question lingered in Sarah's mind for the rest of that day. As she returned to her normal routine of cleaning and maintaining firearms in her workshop, everything felt different. The rifles that once seemed like mechanical puzzles now felt like precision instruments with serious purposes. 3 days later, Captain Mitchell returned with an unexpected visitor. The man introduced himself as Colonel David Harrison from the FBI's hostage rescue team. He was tall, distinguished, and carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to making important decisions. "Ms. Martinez," Colonel Harrison began, "Captain Mitchell has provided me with a detailed report of your assistance in the smuggling operation. Your shot at 3,800 meters has been independently verified by multiple witnesses. I'm here to discuss a proposition." Sarah invited both men into her workshop, curious about what this FBI colonel might want with a small-town gunsmith. "The federal government employs civilian specialists in various capacities," Colonel Harrison explained. "We have forensic accountants, computer experts, psychological profilers, and technical specialists. What we don't have is someone with your particular combination of skills." He produced a folder containing photographs and documents. "There are situations where law enforcement needs the capability for extremely long-range precision shots, but where deploying military snipers would be inappropriate or legally problematic." Sarah examined the documents. They described several recent cases where criminal organizations had established positions that were nearly impossible to assault directly. Bank robbers holding hostages in high-rise buildings, terrorists occupying remote facilities, drug cartels operating from fortified compounds. In each of these cases, Colonel Harrison continued, conventional law enforcement tactics resulted in casualties that might have been avoided with the capability for precision long-range engagement. Captain Mitchell added, "Sarah, your technical knowledge combined with your natural shooting ability represents a resource that could save innocent lives. You would be working with the best law enforcement teams in the country, using the most advanced equipment available." Sarah was intrigued, but cautious. What exactly would this involve? I'm not interested in becoming a military sniper or law enforcement officer. I have a business here, and I enjoy the work I do. We understand completely, Colonel Harrison replied. We're offering a consulting arrangement. You would maintain your current business and lifestyle. When situations arise that require your specific skills, we would contact you. Participation would always be voluntary. He handed her another document. The compensation would be substantial, and you would receive advanced training at federal facilities. You would work with equipment that represents the cutting edge of sniper technology. Sarah reviewed the proposal carefully. The financial terms were indeed generous, but, more importantly, the work would allow her to use her skills for purposes that clearly serve the public good. I have some conditions, Sarah said finally. First, I want complete briefings on every mission. I need to understand exactly what I'm being asked to do and why. Second, I maintain the right to refuse any assignment that I'm not comfortable with. Third, my participation remains confidential. I don't want publicity or recognition. Colonel Harrison nodded. Those terms are completely acceptable. In fact, they demonstrate the kind of judgment and responsibility we're looking for. Over the following weeks, Sarah's life changed dramatically while appearing to remain exactly the same. She continued operating her gun repair business, but now she also began receiving advanced training materials from federal law enforcement agencies. Books on advanced ballistics, weather analysis, and precision shooting techniques arrived regularly. 2 months later, Sarah received her first official assignment. A domestic terrorist had barricaded himself in a remote cabin and was threatening to detonate explosives if law enforcement approached. The cabin was positioned on a hillside that made conventional assault extremely dangerous, but there was a clear line of sight from a position nearly 3 kilometers away. This time, Sarah felt confident and prepared. The shot was challenging, but well within her demonstrated capabilities. More importantly, she understood exactly why her skills were needed and how her action would contribute to resolving a dangerous situation safely. The mission was successful. The terrorist was neutralized before he could harm anyone, and the explosives were safely disarmed. Sarah's role remained classified, but she received a personal letter of thanks from the Attorney General acknowledging her contribution to public safety. As months passed, Sarah found herself occasionally called upon for similar assignments. Each mission was different, but all involved situations where her unique combination of technical knowledge and precision shooting could prevent violence or save innocent lives. Her workshop remained her primary focus, but now it served dual purposes. In addition to serving local hunters and sport shooters, it became her training facility where she continued developing skills that might be called upon to serve the greater good. Sarah's father visited 6 months later and immediately noticed changes in his daughter. She was more confident, more purposeful, and seemed to have found a deeper meaning in her work with firearms. "You've grown, Mija," Miguel observed as he watched her work on a precision rifle. "You understand now why I taught you to respect these weapons." Sarah nodded, carefully adjusting a scope mount. "I always knew firearms were tools with serious purposes. Now I understand that sometimes those purposes involve protecting people who can't protect themselves." As she worked, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that morning when Captain Mitchell first walked into her workshop. She was still the same person, still passionate about the technical aspects of firearms maintenance and ballistics. But now her skills served a purpose larger than herself, contributing to missions that made the world a safer place. The quiet gunsmith had discovered that sometimes the most important contributions are made by those who work behind the scenes, using specialized skills to solve problems that others cannot. Her workshop remained tucked away in rural Montana, but her influence now extended far beyond the local community, reaching anywhere that precision, skill, and dedication were needed to protect innocent lives.